This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to part 1. Part 1. You will hear a man asking about voluntary work in the village that he has just moved to. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 7.
Hello, Jane Fairbanks speaking.
Oh, good morning. My name's Frank Pritchard. I've just retired and moved to Southo. I'd like to become a volunteer, and I gather you coordinate voluntary work in the village?
That's right.
What sort of thing could I do?
Well, we need help with the village library. We borrow books from the town library, and individuals also donate them. So one thing you could do is get involved in collecting them, if you've got a car, that is.
Yes, that's no problem.
The times are pretty flexible, so we can arrange it to suit you. Oh, another thing is the records that we keep of the books we're given, and those we borrow and need to return to the town library. It would be very useful to have another person to help keep them up to date.
Right. I'm used to working on a computer. I presume they're computerized?
Oh, yes.
Is the library purpose-built? I haven't noticed it when I've walked around the village.
No, we simply have the use of a room in the village hall. The West Room. It's on the left as you go in.
Oh, I must go and have a look inside the hall.
Yes, it's a nice building.
Do you run a lunch club in the village for elderly people? I know a lot of places do.
Yes, we have a very successful club.
I could help with transport, if that's of any use.
Oh, definitely. People come to the club from neighbouring villages, and we're always in need of more drivers.
And does the club have groups that focus on a particular hobby too? I could get involved in 1 or 2, particularly if there are any art groups.
Excellent. I'll find out where we need help and get back to you.
Fine. What about help for individual residents? Do you arrange that at all?
Yes, we do it as a one-off. Oh, in fact, there's Mrs. Carroll. She needs a lift to the hospital next week, and we're struggling to find someone.
When's her appointment?
On Tuesday. It would take the whole morning.
I could do that?
Oh, that would be great. Thank you. And also next week, we're arranging to have some work done to Mr. Salisbury's house before he moves, as he isn't healthy enough to do it himself. We've got some people to decorate his kitchen, but if you could do some weeding in his garden, that would be wonderful.
OK, I'd enjoy that. And presumably the day and time are flexible?
Oh, yes. Just say when would suit you best, and we'll let Mr. Salisbury know.
Good.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 8 to 10.
The volunteers group also organises monthly social events, which is a great way to meet other people, of course.
Uh-huh.
So next month, on the 19th of October, we're holding a quiz. A couple of residents are great at planning unusual ones, and we always fill the village hall.
That sounds like fun. Can I do anything to help?
Well, because of the number of people, we need plenty of refreshments for halfway through. So if you could provide any, we'd be grateful.
I'm sure I could. I'll think about what to make and let you know.
Thank you. Then on November the 18th, we're holding a dance, also in the village hall. We've booked a band that specialises in music of the 1930s. They've been before, and we've had a lot of requests to bring them back.
I'm not really a dancer, but I'd like to do something to help.
Well, we sell tickets in advance, and having an extra person to check them at the door as people arrive would be good. It can be quite a bottleneck if everyone arrives at once.
OK, I'm happy with that.
We're also arranging a New Year's Eve party. We're expecting that to be a really big event, so instead of the village hall, it'll be held in the Mountfort Hotel.
The...
Mountfort. M-O-U-N-T-F-O-R-T Hotel. It isn't in Southo itself, but it's only a couple of miles away. The hotel will be providing dinner, and we've booked a band. The one thing we haven't got yet is a poster. That isn't something you could do by any chance, is it?
Well, actually, yes. Before I retired, I was a graphic designer, so that's right up my street.
Oh, perfect. I'll give you the details, and then perhaps you could send me a draft?
Of course.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers to Part 1. Part 2. You will hear a guide at a tourist attraction called Oniton Hall talking to a group of visitors. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
Good morning and welcome to Oniton Hall, one of the largest estates in the area. My name's Nick and I'm one of the guides. I'll give you a brief introduction to the estate while you're sitting down, and then we'll walk round. The estate consists of the house, gardens, parkland and farm, and it dates back to the 14th century. The original house was replaced in the late 17th century, and of course it has had a large number of owners. Almost all of them have left their mark, generally by adding new rooms, like the ballroom and conservatory, or by demolishing others. The farm looks much as it's always done, although the current owner has done a great deal of work to the flower beds. In the 17th century, the estate was owned by a very wealthy man called Sir Edward Downes. His intention was to escape from the world of politics after years as an active politician, and to build a new house worthy of his big collection of books, paintings and sculptures. He broke off contact with his former political allies and hosted meetings of creative and literary people, like painters and poets. Unusually for his time, he didn't care whether his guests were rich or poor, as long as they had talent. Big houses like Oniton had dozens of servants until the 1920s or 30s, and we've tried to show what their working lives were like. Photographs, of course, don't give much of an idea, so instead, as you go round the house, you'll see volunteers dressed up as 19th century servants going about their work. They'll explain what they're doing and tell you their recipes or what tools they're using. We've just introduced this feature to replace the audio guide we used to have available. I see there are a number of children here with you today. Well, we have several activities specially for children, like dressing up in the sorts of clothes that children wore in the past. And as it's a fine day, some of you will probably want to play in the adventure playground. Our latest addition is child-sized tractors that you can drive around the grounds.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
We'll also be going into the farm that's part of the estate, where there's plenty to do. Most of the buildings date from the 18th century, so you can really step back into an agricultural past. Until recently, the dairy was where milk from the cows was turned into cheese. It's now the place to go for lunch, or afternoon tea, or just a cup of coffee and a slice of homemade cake. The big stone building that dominates the farm is the large barn, and in here is our collection of agricultural tools. These were used in the past to plough the earth, sow seeds, make gates, and much more. There's a small barn, also made of stone, where you can groom the donkeys and horses to keep their coats clean. They really seem to enjoy having it done, and children love grooming them. The horses no longer live in the stables, which instead is the place to go to buy gifts, books, our own jams and pickles, and clothes and blankets made of wool from our sheep. Outside the shed, which is the only brick building, you can climb into a horse-drawn carriage for a lovely, relaxing tour of the park and farm. The carriages are well over 100 years old. And finally, the parkland, which was laid out in the 18th century with a lake and trees that are now well established. You'll see types of cattle and sheep that are hardly ever found on farms these days. We're helping to preserve them, to stop their numbers falling further. OK, well, if you'd like to come with me, we will start.
That is the end of part 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers to part 2. Part 3. You will hear 2 theatre studies students discussing stage and screen performances of Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 and 22. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 and 22.
Did you make notes while you were watching the performances of Romeo and Juliet, Gemma?
Yes, I did. I found it quite hard, though. I kept getting too involved in the play.
Me too. I ended up not taking notes. I wrote down my impressions when I got home. Do you mind if I check a few things with you, in case I've missed anything? And I've also got some questions about our assignment.
No, it's good to talk things through. I may have missed things too.
OK, great. So, first of all, I'm not sure how much information we should include in our reviews.
Right. Well, I don't think we need to describe what happens, especially as Romeo and Juliet is one of Shakespeare's most well-known plays.
Yeah, everyone knows the story. In an essay, we'd focus on the poetry and Shakespeare's use of imagery, etc., but that isn't really relevant in a review. We're supposed to focus on how effective this particular production is.
We should say what made it a success or a failure.
And part of that means talking about the emotional impact the performance had on us. I think that's important.
Yes. And we should definitely mention how well the director handled important bits of the play, like when Romeo climbs onto Juliet's balcony.
And the fight between Mercutio and Tybalt.
Yes. It would also be interesting to mention the theatre space and how the director used it, but I don't think we'll have space in 800 words.
No, OK. That all sounds quite straightforward.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions